Newton believed light to be made of particles. And while it's obvious to us now that light is the propagation of waves of energy, can anyone think why Newton believed as he did?
Well, a wave needs something to push against, does it not? That's what makes it a wave. But what is there to push against in a vacuum?
Therefore, the vacuum must contain a massless, invisible substance. An ether, if you will.
Mr. Gillies and Mr. Perry. You've been reading ahead, haven't you?
No. It's only logical.
Common sense dictates it.
However they came to it, Mr. Perry and Mr. Gillies are correct. Maxwell's equations presuppose a universal ether that permeates space. And we'll be talking about that next week. Good day, gentlemen.
Professor Godfrey. Detective William Murdoch. I'm investigating Professor Bennett's murder.
I have another class. Might we continue this conversation while we walk?
Of course. I understand you were talking to Professor Bennett on the telephone last evening.
How did you know that?
My constable was able to trace the call through the university switchboard.
Only logical, I suppose.
Yes. Can you tell me what the two of you were discussing?
Comets, if you must know. He and I were in somewhat of a competition to see who would be the first to spot the return of a comet Tycho Brahe, recorded in 1589.
The switchboard also told me you were speaking to him at 9 o'clock, precisely when Professor Bennett was murdered. Tell me, how did your conversation end?
Suddenly. Look, Detective, Samuel simply stopped talking. I didn't know he'd been murdered, obviously. I only found that out later.
When was that?
Midnight. The dean telephoned.
Did you not find it strange that Professor Bennett ended the conversation so abruptly?
Samuel and I often had heated discussions. It was nothing for him to simply hang up or quit talking. He was a petulant sort.
I take it last night was one of those conversations.
It was.
I'll need a full account of your whereabouts last night.
Are you implying that I had something to do with this?
You admit to having a stormy relationship with the deceased.
Good God, man. I was on the phone, in my rooms, talking to the victim. Isn't that the perfect alibi?
A strange choice of words, Mr. Godfrey.
And I have a few other choice words to offer. But I'm late. A good day, sir.
A devious device, Professor.
Oh, this is absurd.
Prior to your telephone call to Professor Bennett, you attached a firing mechanism similar to this one underneath the coal cart. Then, you attached a timing device, an adaptation of an hourglass.
This is absolutely ridiculous.
On the night of the murder, you set the device in motion. That gave you time to get back to your rooms, telephone Professor Bennett, and lure him to his telescope, placing him in the exact firing line that you had carefully calibrated. The rifle went off at exactly 9 o'clock. The work of a brilliant mind.
It is the product of a deluded imagination.
Who but a physicist could have dreamt up such a scheme, let alone set it into motion with such precision? I would commend you, sir, if your intent weren't so murderous.
Your commendations would be unfounded. Your clever little theory is posited on a faulty premise.
That being?
That my phone call was intended to lure Professor Bennett to his telescope.
You said yourself you were discussing comets.
Discussing comets. Not looking for them. Think. The sky was cloudy that night. You couldn't see the moon, let alone a comet. And you call yourself a detective. Those are Vislitzeno's stereo formula for single and double bonds.
I see. Rather advanced concepts to be teaching your students.
I don't believe in coddling minds. Now, what might I do for you, Detective?
Why did you pay a young woman to undress for Professor Bennett?
What sort of ridiculous accusation is that?
It was to ensure that he would be standing at his telescope at precisely 9 o'clock, wasn't it?
Then again, based on everything you've uttered up until this point, should I have expected otherwise?
Do you deny writing this note?
Yes.
Well, your script is quite distinctive, particularly the H's.
Another faulty assumption on your part has led you astray, Detective. It's not my handwriting.
It isn't?
No, it was written by one of my teaching assistants. You are becoming quite tiresome, Detective. Your superiors will hear from me again.
Yes, I'm sure they will, but if it's all the same, whose handwriting is it then?
Why don't you ask him yourself? Morning, gentlemen. This morning, we have a somewhat unorthodox guest. Detective William Murdoch of the Toronto Constabulary. Detective?
Gentlemen, 24 feet per second. Applied physics. The final lesson in applied physics.
Detective.
Professor Godfrey, thank you very much for your cooperation.
I believe I may have underestimated you.
And I you.
Yes, I'd give you an A-, I think.
Minus?
Well, as you've so clearly proven, in the real world, nothing is perfect.
No. No, it isn't.